Welcome to the Money Huddle, a podcast that discusses financial topics for families, retirees, and small business owners. Hosted by Michael Baker and Ross Marinell. All opinions expressed by Michael and Ross or any podcast guests are solely their own opinions and may not reflect the opinions of Advisory Alpha. The podcast recording is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Advisory Alpha may maintain positions in securities discussed on the program.
All right, welcome back to the Money Huddle. My name is Michael Baker, and I'm here with Ross Marinell. Ross, how you living this morning?
Michael, doing fantastic. Had a nice, quiet Thanksgiving. How you been, man?
I've been great. I have, of course, like millions of other Americans, sworn myself into hardcore diet to recover from what I just did over Thanksgiving because it was
a food crime.
It was a food crime. And I multiple counts. Multiple counts. You know, I don't know what else to say, man.
Now that would make some fun entertainment on court TV.
I would be guilty. I wouldn't have much of a case. You know, like the evidence is clearly up against me, Your Honor. All I could do is throw myself at the mercy of the court.
So we agree we can't mount much of a defense against our food crimes over Thanksgiving.
It's crazy.
What's on? What should we kick off with today?
Well, I think we would be doing everyone a disservice if we just skated past the fact that we have yet another variant of our favorite virus, COVID. I think COVID-19 is going for virus of the decade. What do you think?
It's already won that. It's that's in the bag.
Yeah. So, of course, Thanksgiving, Friday, Black Friday, my family, we were out and we were up in the mountains and I just doing a little shopping, kind of out, just enjoying the town. And, I pull out my phone as we all do. And man, the stock market was just having a temper tantrum because the Omicron variant was reported in South Africa. And of course, sure, by the time you're watching this or listening to this, you've likely heard that there is a new variant of the coronavirus out there. And it's got people nervous.
Well, the anytime it resurfaces in the headlines, it's a full court press from the media. We get the whole round of presentations from all of our leaders. The real question is what's the severity of this variant? For what does it mean for us, for our health if we get it? And will the vaccines have some efficacy against it? And so I think the jury's still out. It's obviously creates immediate news and fear and moves the market. But the truth is we really don't know. And I think it's fine to just say, we don't know where this is going yet. Let's just be patient and stick to what we've been doing for the last 10 years and see if that works as far as our investment plan goes. And this is where it just takes a little grit to get past some of the initial fear and impulse to just kind of head for the hills and know that we don't, the facts haven't all been gathered yet. I listened to the doctor from South Africa that discovered this variant, and she delivered some pretty, it was what her feedback was that the symptoms were mild. And it was a little different than what they had experienced with the other COVID variants. And that's what triggered her interest, was it just didn't seem the same. And it doesn't mean that it was worse. It actually seemed more mild. And so if that is the outcome, which we all hope it is, then I think this is just another variant to add to the long list of COVID variants and the ones we'll continue to see, because it's not going away. I think we have to come to grips with dealing with it economically a little better.
I agree. I think from your lips to every pharmaceutical CEO's ears, one of the big quotes of the week that was moving markets slightly was, I think it was the Moderna CEO. She came out and basically said that, from what she was hearing, the vaccines would struggle with the new variant. But from what we've been hearing so far, that doesn't seem like it's really early to make that call, because they just found it, and they found it, like you were saying, from the doctor that actually discovered it, was like things just seemed a little off, but there was nothing really too severe going on. I think there's, concerns about transmissibility and all of that. But, I think if this thing ends up being, highly transmissible, but very mild, that's good. That's, we don't want it to go the opposite direction, being highly transmissible and even more severe. So it's still too early to tell, but that's one of the things that's weighing on people's minds, especially as we get into the holiday season. But, as we were just talking the other day, as we were chatting about it, we just sat here and watched, they announced the new COVID variant. And then the very next day we watched, there were 100,000 people, I think, in the stadium watching Michigan and Ohio State play football against
110,000 people in Ann Arbor. And so that kind of is my point. I think as a whole, we've come accustomed that there's going to be some variant of COVID around for as long as we're here. You take all the precautions that you feel you need to take as an individual, whether that's vaccination, whether it's social distancing, whatever you choose to do, I fully support. But we have to get back to normal economic activity. We have people that have held back and waited for travel, to see family, to see grandkids that are, newly born. I was talking to a neighbor the other day whose parents live in India, and they were prepared. They were ready and looking forward to hopping on an airplane to come over in December to see a grandchild that's 3 years old now that they haven't seen yet.
I know.
So
man.
there is people want to get back to normal activities. And we have clients that are just out there traveling. They waited last year. They took their time. They took all the precautions they could for their health, and they are out and they're traveling. And I think anything we do right at this point to derail normal activity, I think is counterproductive economically. I want to add this too, Michael, because this does kind of get under my, I'm not that old, but I'm a boomer, right? I mean,
you completely have a "get off my lawn" sign in your front yard.
I'm the grumpy advisor. I hear the Moderna CEO come forward and say, well, we're not sure that our vaccine is going to be effective against this. Here's a reality. Forbes put an article together recently that highlighted the 40 new billionaires that have been minted from the COVID just economy, whether that's pharmaceutical companies creating vaccines, if it's supply companies, testing companies. This is a huge business. There are, on that list alone, 3 people who have become a billionaire associated with Moderna. 2 of those were college professors, one from Harvard, one from MIT. They have an economic incentive to keep this in the news. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrongdoing or that they're not being honest or sincere, but I think that is a conflict of interest that everybody should be aware of.
Well, it's, incentives matter. And I think that, that's not saying, I hear what you're saying, and what you're not saying is that, hey, they want to perpetuate this thing just because. But what you are saying is, just like anybody else, hey, let's just be fully transparent here. There are some people that are going to do extremely well economically if this thing persists and we continue to have to create or manufacture more and more vaccines. So, listen, it's a mess. There's opinions about this virus that are super broad and widespread and everything in between. But I do think I agree with you 100%. We have to get people's lives back on track. And I feel like, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, if we get into a place where they try to come back and get heavy-handed with restrictions again, people are going to really push back, and that's just going to be self-defeating. So hopefully, people are going to, take this news, be sober about it, do what they think is right, be responsible, whatever they feel is the best thing for themselves. But at the same time, our leadership will also be so about it and realize that, the best thing we can do is just try to do the best we can without going into a full-blown lockdown, shutdown, because that clearly doesn't work.
I agree. Thankfully, knock on wood, in this area, our children have basically lived normal lives. They've been in school. They have not had to wear masks. They've been able to just attend sports and do things they normally do. It's time. I hate to see our higher risk population under so much pressure to not travel. I mean, the restrictions on those folks, I want it to get back to normal so they can travel and be free and do the things that they want to do, enjoy their life, enjoy their retirement. I mean, there are people that have retired in the last 2 years that have really not been able to have full enjoyment of what that means and the time off and away from work. And so I hope that gets back to normal. So, all right, Michael, moving on. We had our Federal Reserve Chairman, Mr. Jerome Powell, took center stage a couple of days ago, sent the market in a little bit of a frenzy as well with his commentary about we need to retire the word transitory from our discussion about inflation.
Right. Yeah, it's that Jay Powell. I mean, I feel like I would say he's done a commendable job. Dealing with the pandemic. I mean, they stepped in and really, the central banks, the Federal Reserve, they stepped in and really, I think, really helped us significantly last year. But here we are again, where they've been providing liquidity, quantitative easing, and they need to look at, how long do they allow that to persist, especially since one of the mandates for the Federal Reserve is to control inflation, and we have inflation. And he's saying, look, we probably need to get rid of the word transitory because it's here. And, so now we're in a situation where, hey, we still got virus stuff going on. We're not through the wood, out of the woods yet. And the Fed is talking about, tapering and the markets react. Of course, me, I hate it when everybody hangs on the words of the Federal Reserve, because that's not the way our markets should be responding. Where Federal Reserve, anybody on the board of governors or the chair gets up and has a press conference, and that moves markets. Those are my least favorite market environments to be in, but here we are yet again.
We are, because you mentioned the word taper. So part of their process here to try and control and reel in inflation, and really what kind of slow things down, is slow the bond buying program. So the Federal Reserve was buying $120 billion worth of bonds monthly. They have agreed to drop that by $15 billion a month. So they did start that reduction. I think it was November was the first month it was less. I think it was $105 billion. And their anticipation is that by mid next year, they will be done buying bonds in the U.S. market. So that is one part of the change, which is what the media has dubbed the taper tantrum. We went through this back in 2013 with then Fed Chair Ben Bernanke. And so the market did have a little bit of an initial reaction at that point too. I was looking at an article that sort of detailed from the time that Bernanke had begun speaking about potentially tapering, that the market had an initial jitter down of a little over 5% and then kind of leveled off. Interest rates did rise a little bit, but it wasn't out of control. So we have been down this rodeo before. And so I think the next step is, what will the Fed's response be once they're done with the bond buying program, to then turn their attention to raising rates? And I think that's what's got people a little focused on the commentary, because that can certainly have an adverse reaction on certain components of the market.
100%. And that's what people are looking for, because if when the Fed essentially announces their schedule for tapering, then you can reasonably deduct, all right, they're going to be done tapering at this time. So likelihood of us seeing a rise or an increase in the federal funds rate will happen at certain X date, right, in the future. But if he says, hey, we're going to accelerate that or move that up, then that potentially moves up the dates of when they will start seeing interest rates increase or them increasing the federal funds rate. And so that's what people are anticipating. And it's, listen, I don't like to just boldly say this is going to happen or this is not going to happen, but I'm going to lean heavily in the camp that they're not going to be able to speed up their taper unless some significant inflation, and I mean significant inflation hits. Now, we could debate about whether or not 5 or 6% is significant. It definitely is higher than, historical averages, but at the same time, we're not at double digit yet. In fact, most of the inflation, the heavy inflation we've seen has been in assets. Real estate prices are up, stock market prices are up. We're seeing it now at the pump. We're seeing it in grocery stores. But at the same time, I don't think that we've reached the point where it's debilitating, but it's concerning. And I know that they need to address it. However, we're just in this place now where everyone's eyeballing what the Fed's going to do. And I just can't stand that from an investing standpoint, because that's not the role that they are supposed to be playing. But here we are. So we'll see what happens. But I just don't think they're going to be able to do it, especially since, let's not forget, that one of the things that's happening right now this week is we've got congressional discussion on raising the debt ceiling, funding the government. And lo and behold, let's not forget that the Biden administration still wants to pass another $1.9 trillion in their Build Back Better plan. So, I just don't see it with all this additional spending that is desired by our administration and everything else going on. I don't know how they raise it, increase their the rate of the taper. I just don't know how they do it.
So I had referenced back to the original sort of taper tantrum, which was a fun media topic that didn't truly materialize into much of a market shakedown.
Sure.
It is important to note, though, so just looking at the balance sheet of the Fed. So this is from federalreserve.gov. In the so this is 2008, 2009, the Federal Reserve balance sheet was a little under $1 trillion. By the time they supposedly wrap this bond buying program mid next year, the Fed balance sheet's going to be around $9 trillion.
So they've spent some money, is what you're saying.
It's a little bit of money.
Just a little bit
of money.
Just a tiny bit.
Listen, it's more than what USC paid to have Lincoln Riley come coach their football program.
Oh, there you go. Man, you listen. We need to find out if they've been providing liquidity to some of these universities to hire their football coaches. We need to find out. Like, hey man, we need, our programs in the dump.
Dude,
like,
so they're going to stop buying. They're going to stop buying, U.S. Treasuries and mortgage bonds and start supporting boosters.
It's like Moneyball. It's like they'd be like, you've been thinking about it all wrong. It's like you need to start thinking about buying wins. How do we buy wins? Oh, we need coaches. Oh, it's crazy. So we were talking about that the other day. 2 major moves in college football, and and you might be thinking, like, why are they talking about college football? This is our podcast. It's called The Money Huddle. We talk about sports on here because we love sports, but college sports especially, is big business. It's big business now. And Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma for $100 million to go to USC, plus unfettered use of the private jet for him and his family. And literally the same day, or within 24 hours, Brian Kelly announces he's leaving Notre Dame and going to coach at LSU. I think he's also getting $100 million. Is that like the rate now is $100 million?
Is if becoming a college coach is not a football coach is not like a program at these universities, it should be, because obviously there's a lot of money in coaching. I don't know how these people are getting acclimated, but my goodness. Yeah, it is crazy. Now, I would say this, just kind of circling back, because earlier this year, there was the big hubbub about college athletes finally being compensated for their likeness, their name and likeness. And there was the counter argument was they're amateur athletes. They are there to get an education. They are, and the reality is what we don't have now. We don't have a lot of coaches that are just there dedicated to a program for decades. That stick with through thick and thin, the good and bad of a program to see it through. They're jumping ship when they can, when it makes sense for them to get to a better team, to get to an easier division, to make more money, to have more ancillary benefits. They're not committed to those programs. And I think it's wrong to not allow these young athletes that obviously produce hundreds of millions of dollars for these programs to not be able to take advantage of that. So we saw our first female basketball player from UConn get a Gatorade deal. Some of these athletes are going to make a lot of money too.
I think they should. And, you know, I used to be a purist on this, and I have changed my position. I used to be one of those people that was, you know, college athletes are getting scholarships, you know, they're going to school, getting education. And you know, they don't need to be compensated. They're amateur athletes, they're not professionals. However, we live in a new world now. I mean, we have social media, you have college athletes that have, you know, millions of followers on social media, where if they were just a regular student, a regular kid, you know, they would be getting paid. They would be getting, you know, opportunities for marketing partnerships and other things. And they can't do it because they're, you know, kind of excluded in it. And I kind of liken it to, you know, the Olympics a tiny bit, where the Olympics, you know, they didn't want you know, Olympics is supposed to be the competition of the best athletes in the world. But for a long time, like professional athletes, specifically like NBA basketball players, were not playing and representing, you know, our country, you know, in the Olympics. And that was silly because the best basketball players in the world play in the NBA. So it was kind of dumb to think that the gold medal meant anything when those weren't competing. But I will say, you know, watching these coaches get paid, and some of these athletes can't get paid. When, you know, I remember reading about the kid who's the quarterback at the University of Alabama. And this kid had, I believe, almost $1 million of deals set up for himself, and he had not even thrown his first pass in college football yet. And so, you know, obviously he's got the talent. This kid's good enough. I think he's got the talent to be a legitimate NFL prospect, but nothing is guaranteed. I mean, how many great players have we seen go through the you know, the NCAA and do really well and barely make a dent in the pros, or they play 1 or 2 years in the pros. So I'm for it, especially since, you know, if USC is paying their coach $100 million, their players can get paid as well. But speaking of USC, this was an article, and I want to talk to all the parents out there that may listen to the show. Parents, future parents, grandparents, lend me your ears. College is a business decision. It is no longer this thing where you can just say, you know what, I want my kid to have a great experience. If you want your kid to go to an all expenses paid resort for the next 4 years, then send them to a resort for 4 years. Like, let them like live up, let them go to Europe, let them travel, let them have the life experiences. Do not sign on the dotted line for these plus loans, for these crazy loans, where your kid's going to borrow $100,000 to get an education if they're going to go and be, you know, working for less than like minimum wage when you break it down hourly. So USC was just in the news in the Wall Street Journal because they apparently were marketing a master's degree for social work. And they had hired a for-profit entity to help enroll kids in a virtual program. So this is not an on-campus. So USC, this prestigious university in Southern California, they're using their name and their brand to enroll people into an online class. The median amount that was being borrowed was $112,000 for a master's degree in social work. And it was saying that 2 years later, that half of the students were earning $52,000 or less annually. And this is coming from the Wall Street Journal. These kids are wrecked. They're wrecked. And I mean, it's like I said, I don't want to, like, I want to feel sorry for them, but then I don't feel sorry for them. I'm so torn because this is such a catch-22, because we're telling kids, you know, go to school, get educated, because that is the key to a better future. But then they're mortgaging that future to go get a degree from these big universities that are really phenomenal at marketing, but they could also get the same degree at, the state community college and be much better off. So I'm off my soapbox, but parents, grandparents, young people, stop mortgaging your future for these overpriced degrees. Think about college as a business decision. It's an investment, sure, but run the numbers. If you're going to be a dentist, do what you got to do. If you're going to go into social work, you do not need $100,000 master's degree from University of Southern California to do that.
So this is the annual reminder that private student loans through Sally, I'm looking at SallyMay.com right now as you were talking,
Right.
that we have variable rate options with interest rates up to 11.23% today. Fixed rate options as high as 12.6. Now they could be lower than that if you have great credit, if you have co-signed parent loans, if you do take all the steps to lower those. But we have seen people walk through the door with double-digit interest rates on college loans. It happens.
Yeah.
It is a haul to pay for. And if you don't have the income coming from the postgraduate work, from when you get out of college and get a job, if you can't cover those payments, it is really hard to discharge them and get them. You can lower payments, and there are things that you can do, but those are with you. And
you pretty much have to die if you want to discharge it, if you're not going to pay it off. I mean, even that, it could be taxable. So listen, I'm a firm believer. I love education. I love learning, but I think that we got to do college differently. We got to teach people that, I mean, think about the proliferation we've seen in online degrees in community colleges. But you just look at like where places are hiring now and how they hire people. We've been in business together for, almost a decade. So I haven't been on a job interview in a hot minute, but I doubt that people are going to be, I'm 41 years old. I doubt people are going to be worried about like where I did my undergraduate studies. I mean, I think they're going to be like, hey, can you do the job? What's your experience? How long have you been doing this? They're going to ask you more relevant questions. Now, I could be wrong. I'm not a hiring manager, but to me, it's, I think parents and families need to stop falling for this idea that if they have the name brand university on their diploma, and no matter how they got to, beg, borrow, and deal to make that happen, that it's going to work out, because we're finding out that it's not working out for so many people. They have these massive student loan debts, and then they're going into the workforce and they're earning maybe enough to like scrape by, but they're not, making a dent in those loans over the long term. And then they can't do things like save for retirement and invest and participate in our markets, which is how you build wealth. So I'll get off my soapbox, but please, folks, please think before you sign. It's like buying a car. Like, think before you sign.
All right. So I think that's a good synopsis. It's a tough decision. It's expensive. Be mindful of what the outcome is. Just treat it like any other decision, like any other project. What we put in? Are we going to get back out enough to make it worthwhile? What else you got today, Michael?
Well, the final thing I'll just say, for everybody, I know we're coming into the holidays, but this is interesting, and this kind of falls into the line of personal finance. So I know that a lot of people that are, they're crushing their cash flow, they're doing well, they're making money. I refer to credit cards as a black belt move, but a lot of times people that have a firm grip on their budgets, they'll use the credit cards to, pay their expenses, and they'll take it and they'll pay the credit cards off monthly. What could end up being is you tend to run a relatively, medium to high balance on these credit cards, depending on what your spending levels look like. You need to start looking at those credit card statements carefully, because this has happened to me this week. I paid my credit cards like normal. I normally review them briefly, but I hadn't reviewed them yet. And I got a notification that apparently somebody, not me, had just spent $1,500 at Lowe's on Lowe's.com. So I know that we're in that season where people are buying, likely for for a while have probably been buying Christmas presents or buying a lot of things online so that you can make sure that they get shipped to your home or wherever you're going to, have your Christmas, well in advance. Be monitoring those credit card statements because, people are out there trying to defraud you. And, that charge had gone through clear as day. I saw it on my card and thankfully I caught it. But people are out there still trying to, manipulate and use credit cards. So be mindful of what's going on if you use credit cards this time of year. I mean, I think that goes all the time, but especially this time of year when you may have a higher than usual number of transactions because you're buying gifts and things for other people. So be watching that stuff, guys.
All right. Is that it?
I think that's it for today. I know that we had a jobs report I think come out that looked fairly good. So we'll see how the market continues to digest this news. But hopefully over the next few days we'll kind of get a little bit more clarity on this new variant and where things are going. And I would not be surprised at all if we don't see some clarification coming back from the Federal Reserve regarding Jerome Powell's comments, because I know he doesn't want to move markets with what he's trying to say, but unfortunately, these guys, everybody feels like they have to say something instead of just saying, "Look, I don't know. Hey, we'll get to that when the time is right." I feel like they have to make a statement. Sometimes the media just runs with that. So, all that to say is, I'm ready to continue on with my diet before the Christmas cookies start to kick in. And what about you, man?
You have 3 weeks before the next food crime. I will leave people with this. So when we see some of these short-term, heightened volatility periods, it's important to remember this. This comes from our FinTwit friend Morgan Housel. He says, "Progress happens too slowly to notice. Setbacks happen too fast to ignore." So thankfully, we've had wonderful markets over the last several years. So hopefully you've had a chance to build retirement balances, get yourself prepared and ready to retire. And sometimes, it's almost impossible to not notice the short-term volatility, but let's not lose sight of the progress that has been made over the last decade.
100%. Well, thank you guys for tuning in and listening to the show. And as always, if you got questions for us, if you got something you'd like us to talk about, we'd be glad to do that. You can email us at themoneyhuddle@bcplanning.com. Also, we will begin probably next year with some of these episodes. We're going to get a little bit more detailed in some of the topics and planning topics that we'd like to talk about. So if you got anything specific to financial planning or retirement, feel free to shoot us an email and let us know. We'll make sure we get it in one of those episodes. All right. Thank you for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you.